So, whatever happened to that ultra super cool 1987 science fiction action film that almost never got made because of its goofy title, but ended up being one of the most popular and influential films of the 1980s, ROBOCop? Let's find out. Movies,
Music and monsters.
Hey my friends, Dan Monroe here from Movies, Music, and Monsters. Oh boy, RoboCop. I remember seeing this film in the theaters way back in 1987 when I was just a mere 19 years old, just out of high school at the time. I was working as a cowboy stuntman at a local amusement park here in Western New York called Fantasy Island, and I specifically remember after our final shootout show was done around 8 o'clock that night that one of the other cowboys came up with the brilliant suggestion of, hey, let's grab a few drinks and go out and see this RoboCop thing. I, of course, being the intellectually minded of the group, treated the suggestion with a bit of an arched eyebrow. However, that being said, we all piled into our Ford Pintos and Dodge Darts, headed over to the movie theater, possibly under the slight influence of, shall we say, external sources, and sat down to experience, and I certainly do mean experience, this epic cyber cop movie, and I was literally and absolutely freaked out about what I was looking at on the screen. This super nice police officer brutally murdered by a gang of nasty old thugs, left for dead, rebuilt into a really super cool looking cyborg with a really ridiculous name, now seeking not only the truth about the lingering fragments of his humanity, but also, and more importantly, revenge. Dead or alive, you're coming with me. Okay, to fully understand the complete history of this film, we gotta go back, way back to the early 1980s when a Universal Pictures junior story executive and screenwriter named Edward Neumeier, who was a big fan of themed science fiction films, and this is really cool and quite the magnificent stroke of good luck. The 1982 sci-fi classic Blade Runner was literally being filmed on the Warner Brothers lot, like right behind his personal office, so you know, he just sort of went down there and unofficially joined the production, observing, painstakingly watching scenes come together, basically learning everything he possibly could about filmmaking. I mean, think about it. RoboCop being directly inspired by the classic film Blade Runner. How cool is that? And so it began. He suddenly had a vision of a far distant Blade Runner-type world where an all-mechanical police officer was realizing his own internal sense of human intelligence. So he spent the next few nights writing a 40-page outline, and it was around this time that Neumeier came across a very interesting student video by aspiring director Michael Miner. So the two guys got together to talk about their projects. Miner also claimed at the time that he too had an idea for a movie, but his was called Super Cop, so the two guys formed sort of a partnership and spent a few months discussing ideas and writing together, with the very first draft of the script being called RoboCop, the Future of Law Enforcement. And it was not long before, in early 1985, that Neumeier and Miner had not one, but two different offers, one from Atlantic Releasing and another from Orion Pictures, who eventually did greenlight the project and recently had huge success with the original Terminator. Now, it was around this time that Paul Verhoeven was added as director, and other story details were added and altered, like the connection between Clarence Boddicker and Dick Jones, and also cementing the fact that the movie had to take place in Detroit due to its, well, at the time, failing auto industry. This new director, Paul Verhoeven, took one look at the first page of the script and basically said, "Nope, this is terrible. I'm out."
Wow, seriously?
Well, yeah, and he was then sent a second script with a little note on it saying, "Would you please take a closer look at the subtext?" But Verhoeven was still completely uninterested until his wife read it and basically told him, "You're an idiot. You have to do this. You completely missed the entire soul of the story." And I mean, I kind of get it. This Verhoeven guy was not really all that fluent in English, and all of the jokes and the satire in the film simply didn't make very much sense to him when he was reading it.
Your move, creep.
The cast of this film was absolutely incredible, even though it took around 8 full months to find the right actor to play Alex Murphy. So many big-time stars were considered at the time, like Arnold Schwarzenegger, Michael Ironside, Tom Berenger, and even Keith Carradine. Orion Pictures really wanted Schwarzenegger in the role due to his recent success with The Terminator, but eventually it was Peter Weller who landed the role, not only because he'd already done a sci-fi film called The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai Across the Eighth Dimension, but also because he didn't ask for too much money, and maybe even more importantly, his chin, according to director Verhoeven, was absolutely perfect for the part.
He definitely had that 1980s superhero chin, that's for sure.
Rounding out the cast with Nancy Allen, Daniel O'Harely, Ronnie Cox, the incredible Kurtwood Smith, and of course the super cool, always fun to watch Miguel Ferrer. Fun fact, Stephanie Zimbalist was actually offered the role as Murphy's partner, Ann Lewis, but dropped out because of her contractual obligations with Remington Steele, so they brought Nancy Allen on board, who, like pretty much everyone else, thought that the film's title was just absolutely ridiculous, but she did really like the script, always being known in the past for having very long blonde hair, but the director wanted it cut short, over 8 different times being cut before the director was happy and the proper look was achieved. Kurtwood Smith, who was pretty much known for just television work, auditioned for both Boddicker and Jones, but ended up getting cast as Clarence Boddicker.
Can you fly, Bobby?
Ronnie Cox was awesome, even though he'd been previously stereotyped as playing, the nice guy, so he was really quite enthusiastic to play the villainous Dick Jones. Miguel Ferrer had no clue whatsoever if this film was going to end up being an absolute disaster or a big-time hit, but was super desperate for work of any kind, really, so he pretty happily took the role. Kind of interesting, radio personality Howard Stern was actually offered an unspecified role, but turned it down because he thought, and I quote, "This film is really stupid." Looking back on all the super cool movies and memories is great, but it often reminds me of things that I miss a lot when I was, younger, like less wrinkles and an easier time walking up the stairs. And a big one for me is the ability to fall asleep as easily as I used to, but I have been using something recently that absolutely helps, I can tell you that. This week's sponsor, Dream by Beam. As you guys know, I don't promote products that I don't personally use on a daily basis, and this is one of those for sure. Dream contains natural sleep ingredients absolutely designed to help you fall asleep faster and stay asleep longer. Just grab a scoop, drop it in a mug of hot water or milk, blend it up with your Beam frother, sip it 30 minutes before bedtime, and bingo! You're done. Sugar-free, keto-friendly, dairy-free, and only 15 calories, all blended up in a delicious hot chocolate-tasting drink. And it's not just me. They've helped over 17 million other people get better rest, and if you're interested in sleeping better, it couldn't possibly be any easier. Simply visit shopbeam.com/Dan Monroe. The link is, of course, in the description, and use the promo code Monroe for up to 35% off your order. So yeah, dream by Beam. Just sip it and good night. And now back to RoboCop. Principal photography began on August 6th, 1986, with a budget of $11 million, being filmed primarily on location in Dallas, Texas, with additional filming in Las Colinas and Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And it's kind of funny, the movie takes place in Detroit, but they never actually filmed in Detroit because it was a union city, making it way more expensive to film a production there. But Detroit did make a very brief appearance in some nighttime stock aerial footage at the beginning of the film.
Must have been super cool to see that great RoboCop costume walking onto the set for the first day of filming.
Well, actually, the RoboCop costume wasn't finished until filming had already started. It never really impacted the shooting schedule, but more importantly, it did deny Peter Weller the opportunity to rehearse with the costume, as he was both expecting to and promised to be able to. In fact, Weller was so incredibly frustrated with the costume when he finally tried it on, took over 10 hours to get into it. He got into enormous arguments with the director, stormed off the set, and it looked like that was the end of Peter Weller.
Wait, what?
They even considered bringing in Lance Henriksen as a replacement. Okay, that would have been super cool, but because the costume was specifically designed for Weller and they spent a whole ton of money on it, they eventually found ways to, mend fences, robo-kiss, and makeup.
I was going nuts about this suit, which was genius. I want to say that right now. Rob Boutein's suit and Stefan Dupuis and all those makeup guys and the suit guys were gifted, except there were logistical problems with the internal working of it, fitting the movement, and we had to kind of get together on a weekend, and the suit was like big, and the inner suit was huge. So we do these tests and stuff, and I start to get the feel of it, but it just feels operatic. I couldn't figure out the human nature of RoboCop at that point. I was so stuck on this movement deal. What's this life of this guy? I guess the movie's going to define that for me. But once that happened, it became a beast. It became the great Hebraic tale of this thing that they conjure up, who's essentially an innocent, but they use him. And then they can't get rid of him because he expects to live on.
Well, luckily from this point on, everything went super smooth.
Hate to break it to you there, pal, but Weller's experience in this extremely cumbersome costume was really negative, which, by the way, was incredibly hot during the warm weather. He literally sweat off up to 3 pounds per day, and director Verhoeven started taking meds to cope with the high stress, and apparently filmed quite a bit of the movie, as they say, under the influence. Fun fact, all the shots of RoboCop and his police car show him either getting out of the car or preparing to get into the car. Why? Well, because Peter Weller couldn't fit into the police car in his full costume, so when he actually had to be seen driving the car, he literally sat in the driver's seat wearing only the top portion of the costume, and on the bottom, well, let's just say he had on a fresh pair of Robo underwear.
Robo underwear. Gotta get me some of that.
The special effects in this film were absolutely, in my opinion, some of the best in any movie, even to this day. Well, maybe other than that one shot of the guy falling out the window, but we'll get to that. Such amazing old school Hollywood practical effects like stop motion, or Go Motion, I believe it was called at the time, which was basically just stop motion, but with a motion blur added to each frame to make the models look a little more realistic. And what an incredible team of special effects geniuses, led by the brilliant Rob Bottin, along with Phil Tippett from Star Wars fame, Stefan Dupuis, who won an Academy Award for his effect work on The Fly, and this is really kind of bizarre, but the movie ended up being as violent as it was, mainly because the director believed that it made scenes funnier. The Murphy's death scene was shot at an abandoned auto assembly plant in Long Beach, California. Prosthetic arms were cast in alginate and filled with tubing that could pump blood with compressed air, literally and figuratively spraying all over the set, and the exploding hand took 3 operators to control, and it was specifically designed to explode controllably, meaning it could be quickly put back together and then used again in another take. An extremely detailed, articulated replica of Weller's entire upper torso was also created. All in all, quite the gruesome and overly effective use of incredible practical special effects by some of the absolute best artists ever to work in the industry. The Emil melting sequence was so freaking over the top, maybe a little grotesquely comical in my opinion, but the entire sequence was inspired by the 1977 science fiction film The Incredible Melting Man. Rob Bottin designed and created all the prosthetics with a foam latex headpiece and matching gloves. Another complete version, which was showing even further degradation, was applied over the first, and finally a fully articulated dummy to show the character being struck by Bodeker's car.
Yum! Puts me in the mood for a nice goulash dinner.
The only effect in this film that really didn't come across very well at all was the Dick Jones falling from the building with the stop-motion puppet. The arms were like twice as long as they should have been for whatever reason. I have no idea. Maybe they just ran out of money. But in the end, the special effects overall were just freaking gross and just freaking awesome. Fun fact, the director of this film was a huge fan of the original Forbidden Planet. I mean, come on, just take a look at this shot from Forbidden Planet and then take a look at this shot from ROBOCOP. Super cool. Interesting tidbit, director Verhoeven had a very long history, almost an obsession with the historical Jesus, which is probably why we saw a RoboCop literally, or at least seemingly, walking on water at the end of the film. Now, the RoboCop costume itself, again, designed by Rob Bottin, heavily influenced by C-3PO from Star Wars and robot designs from Metropolis and The Day the Earth Stood Still, combined with a healthy dose of a comic book superhero. He developed about 50 different designs based on feedback from the director, the final costume taking 6 months to build with combinations of flexible foam latex, rigid polyurethane, and a helmet made of fiberglass. I always personally thought that the paint job on the RoboCop costume was incredible. I mean, at first glance, it's got kind of a silver blue look, but then if you turn it towards the light in a different way, it has a really strange purple hue. Really well done, and again, super cool. These guys literally spent an entire year and over $1 million just to create the RoboCop suit.
Serve the public trust, protect the innocent, uphold the law.
And then there's my favorite character in the film, the Ed 209. This thing was so awesome and it looked so real. Well, basically because it was. There was an enormous full-scale version that just sort of stood around and did nothing other than maybe have some smoke trickle out the ends of the gun turrets. The director wanted the Ed 209 to look mean, like really mean, which it certainly did. The fully articulated fiberglass model took 4 months to build and cost $25,000, standing over 7 feet tall and weighing around 400 pounds. There were then 2 different 12-inch miniatures for the stop-motion animation. That way, 2 different animators could work on 2 different shots at the same time. And to complete this ferocious character, the Ed 209 was given the roar of a leopard and a super cool speaking voice that was originally provided only as a temporary voiceover, but then retained for the final cut of the film.
Please put down your weapon. You have 20 seconds to comply.
Very interesting when Phil Tippett was animating the miniature Ed 209 and we saw the guns firing on the front. In order to achieve the look of the fire bursts from the barrels, he literally just took a combination of cotton and tissue paper, stuck it on the front of the barrel, which was lit with a bulb inside, took 1 frame of film, and then repeated this over and over every time you needed to see a muzzle flash from the model. Really awesome, old school, practical special effects. The musical score for this film was really awesome, really haunting, fun at times, and super memorable, costing $600,000 to create, now raising the ever-escalating budget of this film up to $13.7 million, created by American composer Basil Poledouris, combining both electronic synthesizers and orchestral music, which perfectly coincided with what a cyborg really is. Half mechanical, half real, really clever. The extremely violent content made it really hard to even achieve an R rating. In fact, at first, it got an X rating. Some people actually claim that it was refused an R rating up to 11 different times, but the director said, that's absolutely false. It was only actually 8 times. Whatever. And it's hard to believe these gross scenes consistently received the biggest laughs during test screenings. ROBOCOP was unleashed on North American theaters on July 17, 1987, earning over $8 million from just over 1,500 theaters, beating out Jaws: The Revenge, which, not to put the movie down, but doesn't really seem like that big of a feat at the time. ROBOCOP received Special Achievement for Best Sound Editing at the 60th Annual Academy Awards and was the most nominated film at the 15th Annual Saturn Awards, receiving awards for Best Science Fiction Film, Best Director, Best Writer, Best Makeup, and Best Special Effects. ROBOCOP was released on VHS in January 1988, priced at a remarkably high $89.99, and yet still managed to pull in $24 million in sales. Many different versions of the uncut film have been released on DVD throughout the years, and finally a gorgeous restored 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray in 2022, which includes all the uncut scenes rescanned from the original negative to match the quality of the theatrical scans. Absolutely incredibly gorgeous to see. If you've never seen it, definitely check it out. Okay, but what about all the super cool props, sets, and costumes from the film? Well, there's not really too much, but I did find a few. In 2020, a production used armor and helmet from the film sold for almost $9,000. In 2024, we got the prototype leg holster device that was really super cool to see in the film, selling for almost $14,000. One of the ROBOCOP pistols sold back in 2021 for over 14 grand. A ROBOCOP Weller costume sold back in 2011 for almost 18 grand. An original ROBOCOP Peter Weller stunt suit sold just last year in 2024 for $20,000. And here's the big one, a ROBOCOP 2 full action suit worn by Peter Weller in the 1990 sequel sold back in 2024 for $52,500 freaking dollars.
I'd buy that for $1.
And yes, luckily the original screen-used full-size Ed 209 does still exist and in incredibly gorgeous condition.
Okay, but what about all the reboots, remakes, and God help us reimaginings?
Well, we certainly did have a couple of those now, didn't we? Starting with ROBOCOP 2 in 1990, and it's interesting, it was directed by Irving Kershner, the guy who directed The Empire Strikes Back. The original writers from the first film, Newmeyer and Miner, were brought on board, but then fired from the project, which was released to mixed reviews and was estimated to have lost quite a bit of money. Then there was ROBOCOP 3, which was targeted at a much younger audience to, drive merchandise and toy sales, this time with Robert John Burke in the title role replacing Peter Weller, even though Nancy Allen did return as Anne Lewis, but unfortunately this film was both a critical and financial failure. There was a live-action television series released in 1994, but again, didn't really do very well at all and was canceled after only 22 episodes. There were some animated ROBOCOP shows thrown in the mix for good measure. There was a 4-part live-action miniseries in 2001 called ROBOCOP Prime Directives, and I know I don't normally say this about remakes and reimaginings, but I do really have to admit that I did like the 2014 reboot of this film. Again, just called ROBOCOP. It got mixed reviews, but it was definitely a financial success, and like I said, I really did enjoy it. Do I like it as much as the original? No, but it's one of those, in my opinion, remakes that, to me, really did a pretty good job at not only maintaining the essence of the original film, but also gave a bit of an update to the characters and the story. But wait, there's more. Another sequel called ROBOCOP Returns, which ignores every other film in the series, was announced to be in development in 2019, but MGM was purchased by Amazon in 2022, and now, of course, at least as of 2024, a television series has apparently been announced with James Wan to produce.
Excuse me, but I have to go. Somewhere there is a crime happening.
ROBOCOP was not only a highly successful and beloved sci-fi action-adventure film with amazing characters, fascinating subplots, and non-stop, over-the-top special effects, but has also become a solid fixture not only in the classic sci-fi genre, but also in the hearts and minds of moviegoers of all ages, taking its place among other great classic sci-fi movies and TV shows of the 80s and 90s, including Leviathan, Breeders, Darkman, Total Recall, The Fifth Element, Independence Day, Contact, The Matrix, and so many more. We could be here all day, but that, my friends, is the topic of another video. Hey guys, real quick, according to my YouTube analytics, surprisingly, more than half of the people watching this channel are not subscribed. So, if you could do me a huge favor, please hit the subscribe button. It only takes a second, but really helps this channel grow. Thank you, my friends. You're the best. I really hope you guys enjoyed that deep dive all about ROBOCOP, and if you did and you like this kind of stuff, please consider subscribing to the channel. I've got a whole bunch of new videos coming up really soon that I know you guys are just gonna dig.
And if you'd like to help support the channel, you can always buy us a coffee. Link in the description.
And please feel free to stop back anytime as we together continue the conversation on movies, music, and monsters.
Movies, music, and monsters.